The storm had not yet passed. Its voice still lingered through the broken cliffs, whispering secrets of battles long forgotten. The smell of ashes filled the air, a scent of both destruction and rebirth. After the fall of the fortress, silence ruled the land. Only the crackling fires and the faint echoes of sorrow dared to speak. But deep within that silence, something stirred, a heartbeat that refused to die. The night was older than memory, heavy with the scent of blood and forgotten oaths. The kind of night that swallowed light whole and whispered secrets only the damned could hear. And beneath that cruel sky, he awoke, not as the man he once was, but as something far beyond it. Something the world had feared, and then buried beneath chains of fire and betrayal, the fiend, the captive, the name that kingdoms had once forbidden to speak. Wind screamed through the ruins, scattering ashes across the broken earth, as if the heavens themselves trembled at his return. And yet, in the heart of that desolation, his heartbeat echoed. Steady, powerful, defiant, the rhythm of rebirth. The ruins around him were the remnants of what had been his prison, a labyrinth of stone and sorrow that had consumed centuries, but even the stones seemed to shiver now, aware that their purpose had ended. For years the world had believed him dead, consumed by the flames that devoured his fortress, his soul condemned to wander between light and shadow. But what they did not know was that death had not claimed him. It had remade him. His body bore the memory of torment. Every scar etched like scripture across flesh that no longer belonged to mortality. The chains that once bound his wrists lay shattered beside him, glowing faintly with the heat of the power that had undone them. His breath rose like smoke, and with each exhale, the darkness around him pulsed, alive, aware, as though creation itself awaited his command. He opened his eyes, not with the fear of awakening, but with the calm of one who has seen the other side of existence and returned by choice. His gaze cut through the gloom, twin embers that held centuries of rage and knowledge. And for the first time since his fall, he remembered his name. Not the name the people gave him, not the curse the priests whispered, but the truth buried deep within his soul. Kyle. Once a guardian, now a revenant. The wind shifted as if bowing to that revelation, carrying the scent of ash and memory across the wasteland. He rose slowly, his movements silent, yet commanding, every step marking the return of a forgotten legend. Around him, the ghosts of the fallen stirred. The echoes of soldiers who had died defending the fortress he had once called home. And though there were hollow, they watched him with reverence, as though the return of their master was the promise of vengeance long denied. Kyle's voice broke the silence, deep and measured, a sound that rolled through the night like thunder across distant mountains. "The chains have fallen," he said, his words drifting between the worlds of the living and the dead. "The time of silence ends." His voice carried far beyond the ruins, and somewhere, in a kingdom built on his betrayal, a flame flickered out, a silent sign that the balance had shifted. The stars, hidden behind clouds of storm and sorrow, began to flicker once more, as if even they dared to witness what was coming. Kyle looked down at his hands, watching faint traces of crimson light move beneath his skin, the mark of the pact that had both damned and saved him. He had made that choice in the final moments of his downfall. To surrender his humanity to the ancient power that dwelled beneath the word, a force older than gods and colder than death itself. It had granted him survival, but at a cost that could never be repaid. For every breath he took, a fragment of his soul burned away, and yet that same fire now forged his strength. He lifted his gaze toward the horizon, where the first hints of dawn struggled against the night, and for a fleeting second, he remembered her. The one whose betrayal had shattered his heart and sealed his fate. Her face appeared like a ghost within his memory. Eyes of silver, voice soft as wind, words as sharp as betrayal. She had been his light once, and in her absence, he had become the darkness she feared. "Leora," he whispered, the name carrying both venom and sorrow, a promise and a curse. The earth trembled faintly at its utterance, as if even the soil remembered the power that name once held between them. In the distance, lightning tore through the clouds, illuminating the land that had once been his domain. A kingdom now, corrupted by greed and deceit. The citadel, where he had been betrayed, still stood upon the horizon, its towers gleaming like daggers against the dim light. The sight of it did not ignite fury, but something far more dangerous. The patience of a storm waiting to break. He would not rush. Not yet. The world had forgotten the weight of his wrath, and he intended to remind it slowly, deliberately, so that when the reckoning came, it would be absolute. His fingers brushed the soil, feeling the life pulsing beneath it, ancient and restless, and he murmured words in the old tongue, the language of power that mortals had long forbidden. The ground responded, the ashes lifting into the air to form spirals of crimson and black symbols of binding and release. The ritual had begun, not to summon vengeance, but to awaken what had once been his army. From the depths of shadow, shapes began to emerge, skeletal forms wrapped in whispers and flame. The remnants, warriors who had sworn to him in life and followed him into death. Their eyes glowed faintly as they took form, and in unison they knelt. "Rise," Kel commanded softly, and they obeyed. The world shifted once more, a silent recognition that the age of peace had ended. As he turned his gaze once again to the dawn, Kale spoke the words that would mark the beginning of everything that was to come. "They thought the fire consumed me," he said. "But fire does not destroy me. It remakes me." And as the first light of morning broke through the storm, it fell upon his face. A face no longer mortal, but something else entirely. And the world bore witness to the rebirth of the Fiend Captive. His return was not a whisper. It was a promise. And, in that promise, the world trembled. The dawn crept slowly across the torn horizon, dragging its pale light over a world that seemed unwilling to awaken. And in that reluctant birth of day, Kale stood amidst the ruins of his past, silent yet alive, with the quiet rage of remembrance. The ashes at his feet, swirling as if drawn to the pulse of power that emanated from him. A power that had once been forbidden, sealed beneath mountains, guarded by gods, now long forgotten. And as the warmth of sunlight kissed his skin, for the first time in centuries, it recoiled, dimming as if nature itself could not bear the truth of what it touched. For Kael was no longer merely a man. He was the convergence of pain and power, the living echo of a world that had betrayed its own creation. He walked slowly through the skeletal remains of what had once been his citadel, every step stirring the ghosts of memory, laughter, war cries, the distant sound of swords clashing beneath banners that bore his sigil. The phoenix wreath, a symbol of rebirth that now mocked him with cruel irony. Once, this place had been filled with life and loyalty, a fortress of warriors, bound not by fear, but by faith in him, and yet it was faith that had damned them, for it was their devotion that his enemies had turned against him, branding him fiend and heretic, using his strength to justify their fear. The whispers of the dead rose around him now, faint and sorrowful, like the wind sighing through hollow bones. And Kael listened, his expression unreadable, his mind a storm of visions and voices. They called his name, not in warning, but in reverence, for they too had been betrayed, and now, in his return, they sought meaning for their endless silence. I have not forgotten you," he murmured, his voice steady, as he knelt to touch the fractured earth, his hand pressing against the ancient seal carved there centuries ago, the mark of his imprisonment, drawn in blood and sanctified by deceit. The ground throbbed beneath his palm, warm and pulsing like a living heart, and with a whisper in the old tongue, he shattered it. A surge of crimson light tore through the soil, spiraling upward in twisting ribbons of fire and shadow, and the air trembled as the barrier that had once held his essence captive dissolved into the morning wind. The sound it made was not of breaking stone, but of a soul exhaling after an eternity of silence. The forest beyond the ruins stirred as if waking from slumber, the trees bending toward him in eerie submission, their branches whispering in languages older than time. Somewhere within those woods, something ancient and forgotten responded to his call. A creature of the old world, bound to his bloodline, one that had slept through the centuries awaiting his command. Kyle's eyes lifted toward the trembling canopy, and his voice fell into rhythm with the wind. "Alarian," he called, and the name echoed like thunder. The ground cracked. The air grew heavy, and then from the darkness came a sound that shook the bones of the earth. The low, rumbling growl of something vast and eternal. From between the trees emerged a shape, like shadow given form, a beast of impossible beauty and terror. Its body carved from obsidian flame, its wings vast, enough to blot out the rising sun. It was his mount, his guardian, his creation, the dragon of the fiend, reborn from the ashes of death itself. Its eyes burned with recognition as it bowed its massive head before him, the air around them trembling with power. "You have waited long," Kale said softly, his voice tinged with a sorrow he could not hide. "Too long." The beast exhaled, and its breath became smoke that curled into symbols. Ancient runes that spoke of loyalty, vengeance, and the bond between creator and creature. Kale placed his hand upon its scaled snout, and the connection flared, a pulse of energy that spread across the ruins, awakening what had been lost. Far away, in the heart of the capital city that had betrayed him, the royal seers stirred from their meditations, their visions clouded with crimson light, and the faint echo of Kyle's return. The high priest, draped in gold and false holiness, felt his heart shudder as his chalice trembled in his grip, the wine within turning black as ink. "It cannot be," he whispered. But the truth had already taken root. The fiend lived. Kyle could feel their fear, could taste it on the wind, sweet and familiar. He had once feared them too. Feared what men would do when faced with what they did not understand. But that fear was gone, replaced by a cold purpose. He would not simply reclaim what was stolen. He would rewrite the truth of the world itself. With a single motion, he climbed onto Alarion's back, the dragon's wings unfurling with a sound like thunder tearing through the heavens. The sky darkened, clouds gathering in unnatural formation, and the air filled with the scent of storm and steel. As they rose, Kyle looked down at the ruins one final time, his expression both mournful and resolute. "The past is ash," he said quietly. "But even ash feeds the fire." And with that, they ascended into the storm. Os, vanishing into the shroud of thunder and lightning, a specter of vengeance reborn. The flight carried them over lands once ruled by his hand, valleys now overgrown, villages that whispered legends of his cruelty, temples built to curse his name. And as they soared, he watched it all in silence. Every corner of this world bore his mark, and though time had buried his memory beneath lies, it could not erase the truth that lingered in stone, in soil, in blood. He remembered the faces of those who had stood beside him, the laughter that once filled these skies, and he remembered the moment. It had all burned. The betrayal had come not from enemies, but from those he loved most. His counsel, his kin, his heart. Leora. The name once more drifted into his thoughts, bringing with it a blade of grief that no power could dull. She had chosen the crown over him, chosen the promise of peace over the man who had given her everything. And yet, even as rage flickered in his chest, Kale could not bring himself to curse her name, for it was her betrayal that had birthed his rebirth, her deceit that had awakened the storm. The world believed he sought, but vengeance was only the surface of his design. He sought something greater. Balance, perhaps, or the rewriting of destiny itself. For what is a fiend, if not the reflection of the gods' own hypocrisy? The dragon roared, shaking the heavens, and lightning split the clouds, revealing the distant spires of the capital. Kyle's eyes narrowed. The city stood untouched by time, its golden towers gleaming like lies, polished by centuries of worship. Beneath those towers, the throne that had once been his still stood, claimed by thieves who called themselves righteous. Soon, he whispered, the word of promise, that the wind carried like a curse. And as the storm swallowed the sky, the world below shuddered, knowing, without knowing, why, that something old and terrible had awakened once more. and its gaze had turned upon them. The storm had not yet broken, hanging heavy above the horizon like a wound that refused to heal. Its thunder, rolling through the heavens in restless rhythm with the heart of the man who had returned from death itself. And as Chaol and Ilarion soared above the fractured lands below, the world seemed to remember him. The rivers shivered beneath their surface. The forests whispered his name through trembling leaves. And even the mountains bowed faintly as if acknowledging an old king's return. From the skies, Chaol watched the land that had once been his empire, the fields where his armies had trained, the villages that had flourished beneath his protection, before betrayal turned them into graves. And as his gaze swept across the charred plains and ruined temples, a strange calm settled within him, the calm of one who no longer seeks forgiveness, but understanding. He had thought that awakening would bring clarity, that his purpose would be vengeance, swift, righteous, and final. Yet now, as he looked upon the remnants of what was once called the kingdom of Arenfall, he felt something deeper stirring, something older than rage, a realization that his rebirth was not simply to punish, but to restore what had been lost to the greed of men and the cowardice of gods. The dragon beneath him moved like shadow incarnate, vast wings, cutting through clouds as lightning, danced along its scales, and for a moment, Chaol closed his eyes, feeling the pulse of the storm through his veins. Each beat of his heart echoed with power, but also with memory, the laughter of his soldiers, the voice of Leora, whispering promises of forever, the clash of betrayal in the throne room, where his life had ended. He remembered the blade that struck him, forged by his own counsel, wielded by the one he had trusted most, and the fire that consumed his fortress as he fell into the abyss. It should have been his end. But the abyss had not claimed him. It had remade him. The ancient force that dwelled there, the voice that had called to him from the darkness, Lys, had offered him a choice: vengeance or rebirth. And though he had chosen rebirth, the two had become inseparable, entwined like flame and smoke. The voice still lingered within him, faint, but ever present, whispering guidance in tones that both soothed and unsettled him. The balance must be restored, it would murmur. And to restore it, the world must first remember its sins. As they approached the outskirts of the capital, Chaol could see the city's high walls gleaming with enchanted light, sigils carved deep into the stone to ward off the darkness they believed would return. He almost laughed, for those wards had been designed by him, a younger, more naive version of himself, who had once believed that barriers of magic could protect against the corruption of the soul. You built them to keep the darkness out, he murmured to himself. But the darkness was always within. Below, the streets were alive with the hum of a kingdom unaware of its impending reckoning. Merchants shouted over the rain. Children ran through puddles. Priests chanted hymns to false gods whose power had waned centuries ago. Kyle's gaze lingered on the grand temple that dominated the city's heart, its golden spire piercing the clouds like a dagger aimed at heaven. There that his betrayal had begun. The high priest had stood upon those steps, cloaked in sanctity, proclaiming Kael heretic, twisting his mercy into madness, his strength into sin. It was there that Lyora had turned her face from him. The memory cut deeper than any blade, and for a moment, Kyle's control faltered, the air around him pulsing with raw energy, lightning flaring brighter than before. Alarion growled beneath him, a reminder to restrain the storm. Not yet, Kael whispered, regaining his composure. Let them feel safe a little longer. Fear tastes sweeter when it grows from comfort. He guided the dragon higher, beyond the sight of men, and looked eastward toward the wastelands, where the old citadel of the Order still stood. The Order of the Veil, his once loyal knights, had been disbanded after his fall, hunted and exiled. Yet, rumor whispered that remnants remained, living in the shadows, guarding his name as prophecy. If he was to reclaim his purpose, he would need them. But, even as he planned his next move, another presence stirred at the edge of his awareness. Faint, yet unmistakable. Someone watched him through the threads of magic, their gaze sharp as a blade. He turned his eyes toward the distant tower on the city's northern wall, where a single light flickered unnaturally through the rain. A seer. They had sensed him. The realization drew a thin smile across his face. So, he said softly, the game begins. In the tower, far below. The seer of the crown gasped, as her crystal shattered in her hands. Blood seeping through her fingers as visions flooded her mind. A man with eyes like dying stars. A dragon made of storm and flame. A shadow spreading across the kingdom. He has returned, she whispered, her voice trembling with awe and terror. The fiend lives. Her words rippled through the palace like wildfire, reaching the throne room where King Theron, once Kyle's own brother, sat upon the stolen throne. The king's grip tightened around the armrest as he turned to the high priest beside him. "You told me he was gone," he said, his voice low, dangerous. The priest bowed, his face pale. "He was, my lord. No man can survive the abyss." Theron's eyes darkened. "Then he is no longer a man." Far above, Cale felt the tremor of their fear through the air, the echo of their panic feeding the fire within him. He raised his hand, and the storm answered, thunder rolling in acknowledgement of its master. "You stole my throne," he whispered, "but not my destiny." Yet even as his anger flared, a strange wariness touched his soul. He knew what vengeance could do. It could consume. It could blind. And though the darkness within him promised endless power, it also whispered of loss. He could not let it rule him. Not yet. There was still something of Kyle left beneath the fiend. A fragment of humanity, clinging to the memory of who he once was. As night descended again, he guided Ilarion toward the wastelands, the glow of the capital fading behind them, like the last light of an era. The wind carried whispers of prophecy and dread, the scent of war growing stronger with each passing mile. Below, the ruins of ancient temples marked the edge of the forbidden lands, places where even the gods had feared to tread. It was there, amid stone and shadow, that his true purpose awaited. For Cale had not returned merely to reclaim what was his. He had returned to awaken what slept beneath the world that had first birthed the kingdoms and would one day end them. And, as the dragon descended into the storm's heart, the heavens opened in rage, lightning tearing the sky, as though the very fabric of creation resisted his coming. But Cale only smiled, eyes burning with defiance and destiny. "Let them tremble," he said. "The rebirth has begun." The wastelands stretched before him like an endless scar across the face of the world, a barren expanse of ash and bone, where nothing grew, where the wind carried the cries of the forgotten, and the air itself tasted of sorrow and rusted blood. And as Cale descended through the storm, with Ilarion's wings folding against the raging winds, he felt the weight of memory pressing against his chest like an old wound reopening. For this place had once been the cradle of his greatest triumph and his most grievous sin. The skies above were veined with lightning, but the ground below was darker still, cracked and scorched, littered with the remnants of battles fought long before men had learned the meaning of war. This was the abyssal plain, the ancient burial ground of the first gods, a place forbidden to all who still valued their souls. As his boots touched the blackened soil, The world seemed to hold its breath, the storm easing to a hush as, though, even the heavens dared not interrupt what was about to begin. Alarion landed behind him, the beast's great body folding into shadow, its molten eyes burning softly as it lowered its head in silent reverence. Kale ran his hand along the creature's scales, feeling the pulse of the ancient bond between them, and for a moment, he allowed himself a fragment of peace. Not joy, but the stillness of purpose. Before him rose the shattered remains of an ancient fortress, its towers half buried in the earth, its gates sealed by stone that glowed faintly with the remnants of divine wards. This was the citadel of the Vale, where once the Order had sworn their oath to him, where they had forged the laws that would protect humanity from the chaos of gods and demons alike, and where, in the end, they had betrayed their vow to deliver him to both. The silence here was not emptiness. It was expectation, a silence that watched and remembered. Kyle took a slow breath, the air thick with the scent of rain and decay, and as he stepped forward, his shadow stretched across the ground like a living thing. The wards on the gate shimmered in recognition, their ancient language burning with the faint light of warning. "You still resist me?" Kyle murmured, his voice low, his eyes narrowing. "Even after all this time." He placed his hand upon the gate, and the runes flared violently, their light cutting through the darkness in a desperate attempt to repel him. But the power that coursed through his veins now was not the same as before. It was older, deeper, born of the abyss itself. "I am no longer bound by your gods," he said. And with a single breath, he spoke the forgotten word of unbinding. The light shattered like glass, cascading into 1,000 embers that fell upon the ground and were swallowed by the earth. The gates creaked open, revealing the great hall within. A cathedral of bones and stone, its walls carved with the faces of saints and sinners alike, their eyes hollow and watching. The air was thick with dust, but beneath it lingered a faint vibration, a heartbeat of power, buried deep beneath the citadel's foundations. He could feel it, calling to him, the remnants of the Order's seal, the power that had once been his to command. "You never destroyed it," he whispered to himself, realizing the truth. "You only buried it." His voice echoed through the empty hall, and for a moment, it seemed the walls themselves trembled in response. As he moved deeper inside, the shadows grew thicker, coiling like smoke, forming shapes that danced at the edge of vision. Ghosts of the fallen knights appeared briefly, Men and women, in broken armor, eyes hollow but burning with recognition. "My lord," one whispered, her voice thin as wind. "You have returned." Cale paused, his hand tightening into a fist. "You were loyal," he said quietly. "And loyalty was your death." The ghost bowed her head. "We would die 1,000 times more for you." He stepped past them, his heart heavy with the weight of their faith, and descended the stone stairway at the back of the hall. A spiral that led deep into the bowels of the earth, where the true heart of the citadel lay. With every step, the air grew colder, thicker, until the silence was so absolute that it pressed against his ears like water. At the bottom of the descent, a great chamber opened before him. The chamber of the veil, where the first pact between mortals and the divine had been sealed in blood. In the center of the room stood a single monolith, cracked and ancient, its surface engraved with symbols that shimmered faintly like dying stars. Cale approached it slowly, reverently, the memory of his past life flooding back with every step. Here, he had bound the power of the gods to the will of man. Here, he had promised balance. And here, they had betrayed him. The monolith pulsed faintly, sensing his return, and from its depths came a faint whisper. The echo of the voice that had saved him. In the abyss. "You have come at last," it said, though no mouth spoke. The cycle turns once more. Cale bowed his head, his eyes closing briefly. "I have returned to finish what was begun," he answered, his tone steady, but edged with sorrow. "And what do you seek, child of ash?" the voice asked, soft and knowing. "Not vengeance," Cale said, though he felt the lie burn on his tongue. "Justice. Restoration. Truth." The monolith's glow brightened, its runes shifting like living script. "To restore the world, you must first tear it down. To reveal the truth, you must unmake the lies that sustain it. Are you prepared to bear that burden once more?" Cale raised his head, meeting the monolith's gaze. If such a thing could be said to exist. "I was born from that burden," he said, "and I have carried it through death." The chamber trembled, dust falling from the ceiling as a low hum filled the air. The runes ignited in crimson light, and the floor beneath him cracked, revealing veins of energy that spread outward like lightning. Alarion roared from above, sensing the surge, and the earth itself seemed to breathe. The monolith's voice deepened, resonating through Cale's bones. "Then rise, reborn one, and claim what was yours. Awaken the vial." Cale pressed his palm to the stone, and power erupted through him. not the wild fury of the abyss, but a controlled storm of balance and chaos intertwined. Images flashed through his mind: the creation of the world, the birth of gods, the corruption of their will, and the forging of the Fiend himself as the counterweight to their arrogance. He saw it all, felt it all, and when the vision faded, he fell to his knees, gasping as smoke rose from his skin. The power had returned. The veil was his once more. Yet with that power came understanding, and in that understanding, pain. For he saw now that his return was not chance. It was design. Someone had broken the balance deliberately, manipulating fate itself to awaken him. And though he did not yet know who, he could feel their presence, watching from afar, patient, calculating. "So be it," he whispered, rising slowly, his eyes glowing faintly with the light of the veil. "If I am your weapon, then I will choose my own war." Above, the storm screamed once more. Lightning tearing the sky open as the citadel shook, ancient stones groaning under the weight of awakening power. The wastelands trembled. The old gods stirred uneasily in their tomes. And across the distant capital, the seers cried out in terror. For the Fiend was no longer captive, no longer bound by gods or man. He was reborn in truth, the harbinger of a new age, the shadow of judgment upon a broken world. And as Kale stepped into the storm once more, his voice carried through the thunder like prophecy. "The world forgot me," he said. "Now it will remember." The storm had given birth to silence, an eerie calm that spread across the wastelands like the breath before a scream. And as Kale emerged from the shattered citadel of the veil, the crimson glow of the awakened monolith, still burning faintly behind him, the world seemed to shift around his presence. The air thicker, heavier, alive with whispers that carried his name as both a warning and a prayer. The veil's power coursed through his veins like molten fire, each pulse a reminder that he was no longer merely man or myth. He was the bridge between creation and destruction, the balance reborn to correct a world that had forgotten its own laws. Alarian circled above, wings carving through the thunderclouds. The beast's roar, echoing across the desolation, proclaiming the return of the Fiend not as a secret, but as a declaration to gods and mortals alike. Kyle stood unmoving for a long while, his gaze fixed on the horizon, where the dark outline of the capital glimmered faintly beneath the rain. Beyond those walls lay the throne that had once been his, the bloodline that had betrayed him, and the woman who had damned him with a kiss of mercy. His fingers curled slowly into a fist, not in anger, but in contemplation. For though his heart burned with purpose, the power within him whispered caution. The veil was not merely strength. It was will, and to wield it fully, he would need more than vengeance. He would need allies, those untouched by the corruption of kings and gods. He turned his gaze westward, toward the Valley of Thorns, where the last remnants of the old order were said to dwell, exiled and forgotten, bound by oaths to no crown. They had been his most loyal warriors who believed in balance over power, and if they still lived, they would answer his call. With a thought, he summoned Ilarion, the dragon descending in a cascade of lightning and wind, its massive wings folding with grace that belied its size. The ground trembled as it landed, and Kale climbed onto its back, his cloak of black and crimson flaring against the storm. To the west, he said softly, and the beast obeyed. The world blurred beneath them as they flew, the wastelands giving way to rolling plains, drowned in mist, rivers like veins of silver threading through the earth. Villages passed below, small, trembling settlements built upon the ruins of his old empire. And Kale watched them in silence, his thoughts heavy with contradiction. These people, once his subjects, now worshipped false gods who claimed his victory as their own, who told tales of his fall as the triumph of light over shadow. He could see the temples dedicated to those lies, their spires reaching skyward in mockery, their priests preaching purity, while their hands were steeped in greed. Yet, he felt no hatred for them, only sorrow. They do not remember, he murmured to himself. And for that, they are blameless. The storm trailed behind him, like a cloak of wrath, its edges brushing the edge of the plains, reminding the world that something greater than kings had awoken. As they neared the valley, the air grew colder, sharper, laced with the scent of steel and old magic. The Valley of Thorns earned its name from the forest that surrounded it, a labyrinth of petrified trees, whose branches twisted like claws toward the sky, each one humming faintly with protective wards cast ages ago. Ilarion hesitated at its border, growling low, said quietly, "This place remembers me too." He dismounted, landing softly on the cracked soil, and with a wave of his hand, the runes, carved into the trees, flared to life, recognizing his presence. The forest whispered his name. Kale, the Fallen, the Fiend. In 1,000 overlapping voices, some in awe, some in fear. He walked forward, the thorns parting for him. And as he entered the heart of the valley, the mist grew thick enough to taste Then, a voice broke through it. "Stop where you stand." The command was calm, confident, and followed by the faint sound of metal shifting. From the shadows, a figure emerged. Cloaked, armored, the insignia of the old order faintly visible on her chest plate. Her sword was drawn, its edge glowing with faint blue light. "State your name," she said, though her tone carried the tremor of disbelief. Kyle met her gaze, his eyes burning softly in the dim light. "You know my name," he said. Her sword faltered slightly, the glow flickering. "It cannot be," she whispered. "You died." "So the world believes," Cal replied. "Yet here I stand, and the veil stands with me." The woman stepped closer, her face pale beneath her hood. "If you are truly Kale, then you know the words of the oath." Kale's expression softened. He spoke the words slowly, his voice resonating through the mist. "To balance what is broken, to protect what must endure, and to rise again when the world forgets." The woman fell to one knee, her sword lowering in reverence. "My lord," she said. We waited. The sound of movement echoed through the fog as others emerged. Warriors, mages, outcasts, their armor worn, their eyes weary yet alight with hope. A dozen, then dozens more, until the valley was alive with the presence of those who had once been the heart of his order. Kyle's gaze swept over them, pride and sorrow intertwining within him. "You have kept your faith," he said. "Even when faith cost you everything." "Faith is all we had left," the woman replied. "And now, it brings you back to us." Kale nodded, his voice steady, but filled with quiet resolve. "The world beyond these thorns rots beneath the weight of lies. The kings who rule now are but puppets of the same gods who once condemned us. The balance we swore to protect has been broken, and if it is not restored, the end that was once delayed will come again. Not as war, but as decay." Murmurs rippled through the gathered warriors. "What must we do?" one asked. Kyle looked toward the horizon, where the storm brewed like a living thing. "We prepare," he said. "The veil has awakened, and its power stirs the old gods. They will come for us soon. For me. But we will not hide." He turned back to them, his eyes burning with purpose. "The time for shadows has ended. The fiend they fear will become the savior they never deserved." A low growl of approval moved through the crowd. The woman who had first confronted him stepped forward again. "Then say the word, and we are yours once more." Kale raised his hand, summoning a shard of crimson light that swirled into the air above them. pulsing with the power of the veil. Bah! By the fire that destroyed me, he said, his voice carrying through the valley, and the darkness that remade me, I call upon the order of the veil to rise again. The crimson light expanded, spreading through the mist, marking each warrior with the sigil of the old world. A burning circle, surrounded by wings of shadow. The ground trembled, and the air hummed with renewed power as the reborn order knelt before their master. Cal stood at their head, a figure both feared and revered, his silhouette framed by the storm. The age of kings is ending, he declared, and, in its place, the age of truth will begin. Lightning tore through the clouds, thunder answering his vow. The dragon roared above, and the valley itself seemed to awaken with life and purpose, long lost. Kyle's eyes lifted to the darkening sky, where the first star flickered like an omen, and his voice fell to a whisper only the wind could hear. Lyora, he murmured. The fire you lit still burns, and it will consume us all. The night spread across the valley like ink spilled upon ancient parchment. And as the last echoes of thunder faded into the distance, Kale stood among his reborn order. The crimson glow of the veil pulsing faintly across their armor, binding them together as one heartbeat, one will, one purpose reborn from ruin. The air was thick with energy, raw and alive, whispering secrets of the old world. And for the first time in decades, the Valley of Thorns thrummed with power, not of the gods, but of those who had once defied them. Kyle's gaze swept across his followers, warriors hardened by exile, mages scarred by years of silence, assassins who had turned from kings to shadows, each one a fragment of the balance that had once been broken. He felt the weight of their faith pressing upon him like invisible chains, not of burden but of expectation. And he knew that their hope was both his greatest weapon and his deepest responsibility. Alarion, the great dragon, circled above the valley, its wings stirring the mist into spiraling columns that caught the crimson light like smoke from a divine forge. Kale watched the creature descend, its golden eyes reflecting both reverence and warning. The beast had been bound to him by the ancient blood pact, forged before the veil had ever been broken. But even that bond trembled, now beneath the weight of what Kale had become. Something neither mortal nor immortal, neither god nor man, but a force that unsettled the very foundation of existence. The veil stirs within you, a voice said from behind him, smooth and quiet, laced with power, that vibrated through the ground. Kale turned to see a figure stepping from the mist. A man, draped in dark robes, embroidered with faint symbols of protection and clight. His eyes glowing faintly blue, his hair streaked with silver, though his face was unmarked by age. It was Sarath, the last Archmage of the Order, and once Kyle's closest advisor, before the betrayal that tore their world apart. "You should not have come," Kale said, his tone neither welcome nor warning, but something colder. "A test. You should not have died." Sarath replied softly, his expression unreadable. "And yet here we stand, both breaking the laws we swore to protect." For a long moment, neither spoke, only the storm above filling the silence with its distant growl. Then Kale turned back toward the horizon, where the faint glow of the capital burned like a dying ember. "The gods will not allow this rebirth to stand," he said. "They will send their heralds, their prophets, their armies dressed in light. They will come," Sarath agreed. "But the world is not as it was. Their influence wanes, their followers question, their temples crumble under the weight of hypocrisy. Even gods fade when faith falters." Kale's lips curved into a faint, grim smile. "And yet they fear me still." Sarath stepped closer, his voice lowering. "They fear what you represent. Not vengeance, but choice. You tore open the truth that balance is not born of purity but of understanding. They cannot control that truth, so they will destroy it." Kale's eyes flickered, the light of the veil glowing behind them. "Then let them come. Let them see what their creation has become." The Archmage studied him for a moment longer, before sighing, the sound weary but resolute. "There is something you must know, Kyle. The Veil's awakening was not isolated. When it called to you, it called to others." Kyle's attention sharpened. "Others?" "The remnants of the Divine Guard," Sarath said grimly. "Those who once guarded the gate of Atheris. They have awoken too. Not as men, but as vessels. The gods prepare to walk again through their flesh." A silence fell heavier than thunder. Kyle's expression hardened, his jaw tightening. "Then the balance has already begun to shift." "It has," Sarath replied. "And the world will not survive another war between the divine and the defiant." Kale turned to face his army, their eyes fixed upon him, waiting for purpose, waiting for direction. He raised his hand slowly, the crimson energy swirling between his fingers like liquid fire. "Then we end it before it begins," he said. "We strike not at their armies, but at their faith. The temples fall first." The crowd stirred, murmurs rippling through the ranks. You would make war upon the gods themselves? Asked the woman warrior. Eris, his commander, the first to have knelt before him in the valley. Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed the fear of one who knew what such defiance would cost. Kale met her gaze. Not war, he said. Correction. The gods fed upon belief. We will starve them. Eris bowed her head, accepting his word as law, even as doubt flickered in her eyes. Kyle saw it, but he did not blame her. Faith, even in him, was a fragile thing. Sereth, Kale said, prepare the old spells. The kind forbidden, even by our own order. If the gods seek vessels, we will close the paths that bind them to this realm. That magic comes with price. The Archmage warned. Every seal broken, every binding reforged, draws power from life itself. Kale's expression was resolute. Then let it draw from mine. You tempt the veil's will, Sereth said. It may claim more than you intend to give. Kale turned to the storm, the lightning flashing across his face. His expression carved from stone. It already has. The Archmage bowed his head slightly, understanding that there was no dissuading him. The preparation began that night. Fires burned in perfect circles around the valley. Ancient runes, carved into the soil glowing as Sereth, and his mages began their incantations. The air thickened, the sky shuddered, and the earth seemed to breathe beneath their feet. The old order knelt, chanting in the language of creation, their voices echoing across the dark, like the heartbeat of a sleeping god. Ilarion roared from above, spreading his wings as lightning danced across his scales, each flash illuminating Kyle. Standing at the center of it all, unmoving, unflinching, a silhouette of defiance against the divine. He could feel the veil's power rising within him, pulsing in rhythm with the storm, demanding release. His thoughts drifted to Lyora, the woman who had once seen the light within his darkness, who had loved the man he was before the world called him a monster. Her face haunted him even now, a memory sharper than any blade. If you can see me now, he whispered into the wind. Know that the world you dreamed of will live, even if I must burn to give it breath. The runes flared brighter. The mages' voices reached their peak, and suddenly, the earth cracked open beneath the valley. Column of crimson light, bursting skyward, like the cry of the heavens themselves. The magic surged through Kale, consuming him, reshaping him, binding him tighter to the veil until he could feel the fabric of existence tremble in his grasp. For one terrifying, transcendent moment. He felt everything. The prayers of mortals, the hunger of gods, the pulse of creation itself. It was agony. It was ecstasy. It was power beyond measure. Then, silence. The light dimmed. The fires died, and Kael fell to one knee, his breath shallow but steady. Sereth rushed to his side. "The seal is formed," he said, awe and fear mingling in his tone. "The gods will not cross easily now." Kael rose slowly, his eyes burning with faint traces of both red and gold. "Not easily," he said, his voice calm. "But they will try." The Archmage nodded grimly. "Then we must be ready." Kael turned toward the horizon once more. The storm clouds, parting slightly to reveal the faintest glimmer of dawn. "Let them come," he murmured. "For every god that rises, I will remind them. Even eternity can bleed." The first light of dawn bled weakly through the clouds, a fragile promise that the world had not yet surrendered to the darkness swelling within its veins. And Kael stood at the edge of the Valley of Thorns, watching as the rising sun struggled to pierce the storm that had taken permanent residence above his stronghold. Its crimson tinted rays casting ghostly silhouettes across the field of warriors, preparing for the trials ahead. The air was charged with the weight of new purpose, the forging of a rebellion not against men, but against the celestial order itself. And though silence ruled the valley, that silence was not peace. It was anticipation, the breath before battle, the heartbeat before history shifted. Once more, Kael's cloak billowed in the wind, torn and frayed at its edges, yet regal in its defiance. And beneath its shadow, the symbol of the veil pulsed faintly against his armor, like a living flame, proof that the forbidden power he had awakened had not only accepted him, but bound itself to his very essence. Alarion, the dragon of storms, rested nearby, its great wings folded like mountains of living steel, its eyes glimmering with the reflection of worlds unseen. Around Kael, the remnants of the old order moved with disciplined precision, repairing weapons, tracing runes, whispering oaths to the wind. For every soul within the valley knew that they were no longer fighting for survival alone. They were fighting to rewrite destiny itself. Yet amid the hum of preparation, Kael's thoughts wandered far from the present moment, drifting instead toward the ruins of memory, to the citadel of Atheris, where once, long ago, the gods themselves had walked among mortals and declared him chosen, their champion of balance, their bridge between light and shadow. He had believed them then, had fought their wars, had sacrificed his humanity for the illusion of divine order, only to learn that the gods he served did not seek harmony, but dominion. It was their hunger for worship that had broken the world, their vanity that had destroyed his love, their deceit that had made him what he now was. The fiend, the outcast, the necessary evil. He closed his eyes, feeling the old scars ache, as though the memory itself were cutting fresh wounds. And when he opened them again, there was no trace of regret, only the cold certainty of purpose. Behind him, footsteps approached. Light, precise, and familiar. "You have not slept," said Eris, her voice steady yet edged with concern. Kyle did not turn. Sleep is for those who do not dream of fire. But she hesitated a moment before speaking again. The men grow restless. They sense the storm coming, but they do not know what form it will take. You must speak to them. Cale finally looked at her. His gaze, sharp yet softened by a faint hint of something human. "And what would you have me say? That the gods we defy are older than the stars. That they do not bleed as men do, but wither like suns. That, when their wrath falls, there will be no heaven left to pray to." Eris held his stare unflinching. "Tell them the truth," she said. "Not the truth of fear. The truth of choice." For a long moment, Cale said nothing. Then he nodded slowly. "Gather them." Within minutes, the valley's warriors assembled before him. Hundreds of figures, cloaked in armor that glimmered faintly with enchantment. Their faces marked by exhaustion and faith alike. The crimson dawn bathed them in an almost sacred light, and Cale stepped forward. His voice rising like the call of thunder. "You stand upon the edge of eternity." He began, his tone deep, resonant, commanding. "The world beyond this valley has forgotten your names, your deeds, your sacrifices. They call you heretics, monsters, fiends. The same words they once used for me. But remember this, the gods who condemned us did so not because we were evil, but because we refused to kneel. They promised salvation and delivered only obedience. They offered light and cast shadows upon all who questioned it. But we are not creatures of their making anymore. We are what remains when lies burn away. We are the balance they feared." A murmur rippled through the crowd, growing into a roar, as Cal raised his hand, the symbol of the veil igniting upon his palm, its glow reflected in the eyes of every warrior before him. "They call me Fiend," he continued, his voice thunderous now, shaking the very air. "Let them. For if being a fiend means breaking the chains of false gods, if it means tearing down the walls of their heaven to build a world that belongs to us, Stopshano. Then I will wear that name as my crown. The roar that followed shook the valley, echoing across the mountains, like the cry of a world awakening. Alarion answered with a mighty bellow from above, lightning crackling across its wings, and for a moment it seemed as though the very sky bowed before the will of mortals. Eris stepped forward, her sword raised high, and the entire order followed, their voices unified in a single cry for balance. The words that had once been sacred, now reborn as defiance. Chaol felt the veil respond, its power flowing through him, and binding their spirits, and into them, in a current of shared strength. He could sense their fear, their hope, their faith intertwining, and for the first time since his rebirth, he felt not alone, but infinite. Yet amid the surge of triumph, a chill cut through the air. Sudden, sharp, unnatural. The light dimmed. The ground trembled. The wind died, leaving behind a silence so complete it pressed against the skin. Kyle's eyes narrowed as he felt it. A presence vast and ancient, like a hand closing around the edges of reality. The mages faltered in their chanting. The dragon growled low, its scales rippling with unease. Then, from the sky, the storm split open, and through the tear descended figures, wreathed in light. Tall, faceless beings, whose very forms flickered between substance and illusion. The air hummed with celestial power as they hovered above the valley, their voices merging into one that reverberated across the mountains. Kyle, of the broken veil, you defy the eternal law. The balance you claim to protect is ours alone to govern. Submit, and the world may yet be spared. Chaol stepped forward, his aura flaring in defiance. You speak of balance, he said, his voice calm but resonant. Yet it was your hand that tipped the scale. You call this defiance, but it is restoration. The beings' light pulsed brighter, their tone sharpening. You were our creation. You were meant to serve. Chaol smiled faintly, a cold, terrible smile. Then you should have made me weaker. With a gesture, he unleashed a wave of crimson energy that collided with their radiance. The sky erupting into chaos. Lightning clashed with divine flame, the heavens themselves tearing under the strain. The warriors below shielded their eyes as fragments of pure light and shadow rained upon the valley. Alarion launched into the air with a deafening roar, meeting the celestial host head on, its claws tearing through illusions that bled starlight. Kyle stood unmoved, his hands raised, channeling the full fury of the veil. The power sang through him, a symphony of creation and destruction entwined. and with each pulse, the divine light faltered. "You cannot win," the voices cried, their harmony fracturing into discord. "We are eternal." "So was the night," Cal replied, "until the dawn learned to burn." And with that, he thrust his hand skyward, the veil's energy exploding in a pillar of crimson fire that consumed the heavens. The beings, not in pain, but in realization, and as their forms disintegrated into the storm, the light above shattered, leaving behind only the raw, untamed sky. The valley fell silent once more, the air heavy with ash and awe. Kale lowered his arm slowly, his breath steady, despite the power that still crackled around him. Eris approached cautiously, her eyes wide. "You faced the heralds of the gods," she whispered. "And you survived." Cal's gaze remained fixed upon the torn sky. "No," he said quietly. "I declared war." The scent of ozone and burning light still clung to the air long after the celestial heralds had vanished. Their voices reduced to echoes that trembled through the bones of the earth, and Kale stood amidst the aftermath of the storm, surrounded by his warriors, who now gazed upon him not merely as a leader, but as something more. A myth made flesh, a symbol carved from rebellion and fire. The Valley of Thorns lay scarred beneath the weight of what had transpired. The ground fractured into veins of crimson energy that pulsed faintly with the remnants of divine power. The ancient trees turned to glass by the force of the veil's surge, their crystalline branches reflecting the blood-red sky above. Alarian, the storm dragon, circled overhead in slow, deliberate arcs, its wings heavy from battle, yet its eyes gleaming with fierce loyalty. While below, the order moved with reverence and fear, tending to the wounded, whispering prayers not to gods, but to Kyle himself. Prayers born of awe, aspiration, and belief in something greater than divinity. Kyle felt the weight of those prayers pressing against him, each one a thread binding his soul tighter to the world he sought to free. And though he bore it in silence, the veil within him stirred restlessly, whispering warnings of balance once more. Disturbed, he walked through the ruined valley, the ground cracking softly beneath his boots, the remnants of divine energy flickering like dying fireflies at his feet. The air hummed faintly, alive with the lingering voice of creation, and Kyle could feel the line between mortal and God thinning with every step he took. He paused beside a fallen warrior, a young man whose eyes still glimmered faintly with the light of the veil's blessing, and knelt, placing a hand upon his chest. The boy's breath was shallow his voice faint. Did we win? Kale's gaze softened. No, he said quietly. We survived. For now. That must be enough. The boy smiled weakly. Before the light in his eyes faded, and Kale stood once more. His expression, carved in stillness though, his heart, burned with silent fury. Behind him, Eris approached. Her armor cracked. Her blade darkened with ash. They will come again, she said, her voice low but steady. You wounded their pride. The gods do not forgive such defiance. Kale turned to her, the faint glow of the veil casting shadows across his face. Then let them come, he said. Each time they descend, they will find us stronger. At what cost? She asked. Every battle with them pulls you further from yourself. I can see it. The light in your eyes. The way the veil speaks through you now. You are changing, Kale. He said nothing for a long moment, then looked toward the horizon, where the ruins of the old world still smoldered beneath the pale dawn. Change was always the price, he murmured. I once believed the gods to be eternal. Now I see that even eternity rots. Eris lowered her head, uncertain whether to pity or fear the man before her. The Archmage Sereth appeared. Then, his robes singed from battle, his eyes hollow with exhaustion. The herald's death cries have reached the heavens, he said, grimly. Their masters will not ignore it. I have felt ripples in the veil, great movements beyond the mortal plane. They are awakening. Kale's jaw tightened. Then the time for waiting is over. We move east. East. Sereth frowned. To Atheris. The holy city still stands under divine protection. It was there you were betrayed. There the gods first spoke to man. To return is to invite annihilation. To return, Kale said, his voice cutting through the morning air, is to finish what they began. Sereth hesitated, then bowed his head in reluctant acceptance. As you will it. Kale turned back to the gathered warriors, his voice rising above the wind. We march at dusk. The veil guides us now, and through its fire, we will cleanse the world of its lies. The warriors bowed their heads, some in devotion, others in fear. And as Kale stepped away, the valley itself seemed to pulse, in rhythm, with his heartbeat. Hours later, as the sun sank, beneath the horizon and shadows stretched long across the land, the order began its march. Hundreds of torches burned like stars, scattered across the earth, their light swallowed by the encroaching night. The road east wound through the desolation left behind by centuries of divine war. Fields turned to glass, Rivers frozen in perpetual reflection. Ruins of temples where statues of gods lay shattered and wept molten tears. Kael rode at the front astride Alarion, the dragon's wings folded close. Its massive form moving like a living mountain beside him. The air grew heavier, the closer they drew to Atheris, charged with unseen power that made even the most seasoned warrior tremble. Along the way, Kael saw villages clinging to the edge of survival. People bowing before false idols, lighting fires in the names of gods that no longer answered. Some recognized him as he passed, their eyes wide with disbelief. Mothers whispered his name, as if invoking protection, while priests cursed him from the shadows. To all of them, he gave the same gaze, not of hatred, but of sorrow. They worship their chains, he said softly to Eris as they rode. And when you free them, they will call you tyrant. Then why free them? She asked. Kael's expression darkened. Because I remember what it felt like to kneel. The march continued for days, through storms that seemed almost sentient, through lands that had forgotten the taste of peace. On the seventh night, they reached the outer gates of Atheris. Once a city of gold and light, it now lay cloaked in a divine haze. Its towers gleaming faintly, its gates inscribed with runes that pulsed like living veins. The air itself vibrated with celestial energy, and even Alarion growled uneasily. It is alive, Sereth whispered. The city itself is awake. It watches. Kael dismounted, his boots striking the stone with deliberate calm. Then let it watch, he said. Let it see what it created. He raised his hand, and the veil's energy coiled around his fingers, like a living serpent, humming with restrained fury. These walls once held my faith, he said quietly, his voice carrying through the night. Now they will hold my reckoning. With a single motion, he unleashed the power. The gates of Atheris shuddered, the runes upon them flaring brilliant gold as they resisted. But the crimson light, the veil burned through their sanctity, devouring the divine protections one by one. The ground shook. The air screamed. And then, with a thunderous crack, the gates split open, their fragments scattering into the mist. The city beyond lay exposed, silent, untouched, waiting. Kael stepped through the breach, his eyes burning with purpose. The gods built their heaven upon our bones, he said. Let us see how it stands upon ash. His army followed, their footsteps through streets, once lined with temples, now eerily empty. The statues of gods loomed above them, their faces cracked, their hands outstretched as if pleading for mercy they had never shown. Lightning flickered across the sky, illuminating Kale's form as he stood at the center of the plaza where once he had been crowned champion of the divine. The memory stabbed through him like a blade, and for a fleeting moment, the man he had been trembled within the fiend he had become. Leora, he whispered, barely audible. If you still walk among the living, forgive what I must do. Then, raising his gaze to the heavens, he spoke not to his army, but to the gods themselves. You took from me faith. You took from me love. You took from me peace. Now, I take from you your dominion. Above, the clouds twisted violently, forming a vortex of light that pulsed like a living wound. The first true answer from the heavens in decades. The gods were listening. Kyle smiled, not in triumph, but in grim satisfaction. So, he said softly, you remember me. The air within the shattered gates of Atheris was thick with the residue of forgotten prayers. Cross. Their whispers echoing faintly through the marble ruins, like the sighs of ghosts who had once believed themselves eternal. And as Kael stepped deeper into the city that had birthed both his glory and his damnation, the weight of memory pressed down upon him like a crown forged from ash. The streets, once paved with gold and lined with spires that reached greedily toward the heavens, now lay silent and desolate. Their divine radiance dimmed to a pale, haunting glow. Statues of gods stood cracked and eroded. Their once perfect faces, marred by the passage of centuries and the slow decay of worship, while the scent of burning incense, faint, almost mournful, drifted from the shattered temples, mingling with the cold air of dawn. His warriors followed in reverent silence, their torches casting trembling shadows across the stones that had once borne witness to divine coronations and celestial decrees. For them, this was forbidden ground, the cradle of divinity, the seat of those who had ruled both flesh and spirit. And to tread here in defiance was to declare war upon creation itself. But for Kael, this place was more than sacred or profane. It was personal. Every step he took echoed against the ghosts of his past, the cheers of the faithful, when he had been chosen by the gods, the silence of betrayal, when they had cast him into the fire, the voice of Leora pleading for mercy as he burned. He felt the veil within him stir, feeding upon the memories, drawing strength from his pain, whispering to him in 1,000 indistinguishable tones. Promises, threats, and temptations woven into one. At the city's heart stood the sanctum of Atheris, a colossal temple, built from stone, said to have fallen from the heavens, its walls carved with runes that glowed faintly in defiance of time. It was here, centuries ago, that the gods had spoken directly to man. And it was here that Kyle's fate had been sealed. He stood before its gates. Their once luminous surface now dull and scarred. And for a moment, he simply stared. Not as conqueror, but as witness to the ruins of belief. This is where it began, he said quietly, his voice echoing in the stillness. Eris, at his side, looked upon the temple with wary eyes. And where it will end? Kale nodded once. If the veil wills it. Behind them, Sereth approached, his robes fluttering in the wind like torn banners. The air here is saturated with divine energy, he said grimly. The gods still cling to this place. Their essence seeps through every stone. Whatever you intend to do, it will not go unchallenged. Kale's expression was calm, almost serene. I intend to remind them what they created. He raised his hand, and the crimson light of the veil ignited upon his palm. Flickering like a living flame, the temple responded instantly, its walls shuddering, its runes flaring to life, the ground trembling beneath their feet, as if the very city were awakening. A voice boomed from within, vast and resonant, a sound that seemed to bypass the ear and strike directly into the soul. Kale of the Balance, you were not meant to return. The words were neither male nor female, neither kind nor cruel. They simply were ancient and absolute. Kale stepped forward, his eyes burning with the glow of the veil. Then, perhaps, you should not have left me alive. The voice rippled through the air like 1,000 wings, unfurling. You were our greatest creation, our bridge between light and shadow. You were to preserve the balance, not defy it. I did preserve it, Kale said, his tone sharp as steel. Until you shattered it with your pride. The temple groaned, cracks spreading through its surface as the divine presence within flared with indignation. You presume to judge the eternal. Do more than presume, Kel replied. I remember. With that, he thrust his hand toward the gates, unleashing a torrent of crimson energy that collided with the temple's barrier. The air exploded with light, blinding and furious, the shockwave rippling through the city and scattering the warriors like leaves before a storm. Kyle stood unmoved, his cloak whipping wildly behind him as divine and mortal power clashed in a symphony of raw creation. Through the blinding light, figures began to emerge, not the radiant heralds of before, but gods themselves, their forms too immense and shifting to comprehend, their eyes burning with the cold fire of eternity. "You have forgotten your place," one said, its voice like the rumble of worlds colliding. "You have become what you were made to destroy." Kale's laughter echoed, dark and beautiful. "You made me to destroy imbalance," he said. "And what greater imbalance exists than gods, who call themselves necessary?" The divine host surged forward, their light cascading like an ocean intent on drowning him, but Kale met it head on, the veil erupting from within him in a storm of crimson flame. The collision shook the heavens. Lightning tore through the clouds. The ground split open, rivers of molten light carving through the streets. His warriors fell to their knees, shielding their eyes from the brilliance of it. But still they refused to retreat. Alarion descended from the storm above, its wings blotting out the sun, its roar joining the symphony of destruction. As it spewed a torrent of lightning into the divine ranks, Kale moved like a force of nature, each step carving fissures in reality itself, each breath tearing through the illusions of divinity. Yet even as he fought, the veil within him whispered, not in triumph, but in hunger. He could feel it feeding on the chaos, on the death of gods, binding itself tighter to his soul. With every blow he struck, he lost a fragment of himself. And still, he did not stop. "You think yourself free?" the gods cried, their voices layered in anguish and wrath. "But you are bound to the very power you wield. The veil was never meant to be yours." Kale's voice thundered in reply. "Then why does it answer only to me?" The storm reached its crescendo. One by one, the gods faltered, their light dimming as Kale's fire consumed them, their forms unraveling into dust that glittered briefly before fading into the void. The temple began to collapse, its sacred pillars crumbling, the sky above cracking open like shattered glass. Through the chaos, Kale stood unbroken, his chest heaving, his body wreathed in both shadow and flame. Around him, silence returned. Not peace, but aftermath. The air was heavy with the scent of ozone and eternity undone. Eris approached, limping, her eyes wide with awe and horror. "You killed them," she said, her voice trembling. "You killed the gods." Kale turned toward her, his expression unreadable, his eyes no longer wholly human, the crimson light of the veil swirling within them like living fire. He said softly, "I freed them." Serath staggered forward, his face pale, his voice trembling. "Kale, the veil grows stronger. It is consuming the boundaries that hold our world together. The more you use it, the more it becomes you. Kale looked up at the torn sky, where faint stars glimmered through the wounds of battle. Then let it, he murmured. If I must become the veil to destroy it, so be it. He turned his gaze back to the ruined temple, now a hollow shell of divinity. This was never about gods or men, he said, almost to himself. It was about balance. And balance demands a price. The wind howled through the ruins, carrying with it the faint echoes of divine laughter. Not mocking, but mournful. Kyle listened, then smiled faintly. Yes, he whispered. I remember what it means to pay. The aftermath of the divine fall lingered like a ghost over Atheris. A city, once bathed in celestial light now, reduced to embers and silence, its ruins echoing with the faint hum of power that refused to die. And as the crimson dawn bled across the horizon, Kale stood at the temple's shattered steps, his eyes reflecting both victory and ruin. The flicker of the veil's energy pulsing faintly beneath his skin as though it had found a home within his very soul. Around him, his followers moved cautiously among the wreckage, their armor scorched, their faces etched with disbelief. For though they had followed Kale through the fires of rebellion, none had truly imagined that the gods could bleed. Yet here they stood amid divine corpses that shimmered faintly like broken stars, their essence dissolving into the mist. The world itself seemed to tremble, as if struggling to comprehend what had been done. The balance of eternity thrown into disarray by the defiance of a single man. Sereth knelt beside one of the fallen divinities, his trembling hands tracing the fading sigils that once marked the god's flesh. Do you understand what this means? He whispered, his voice trembling between awe and dread. Without them, the threads that bind creation will unravel. The sun, the sea, the very breath of the world, all were woven by divine will. Kale's gaze remained fixed on the horizon, his voice low and unwavering. Then we will weave them anew. Sereth looked up sharply, his eyes wide. You cannot simply replace gods. Their essence was eternal. Nothing is eternal, Kale replied, his tone cold. Not even eternity itself. A hush fell over the warriors who heard him. Their faith in him, a fragile flame, flickering between worship and fear. Eris approached, her armor cracked, her blade still stained with the blood of divinity, her voice firm, but heavy with unease. The men speak of omens, she said. The sky burns crimson, the rivers run black, and the moons move against their cycle. They whisper that the world is dying. Kale finally turned, his gaze meeting hers. And in his eyes burned both sorrow and something deeper. Inevitability. No, he said softly. The world is not dying. It is changing. The veil within him pulsed at those words, as though affirming them, a sentient hunger, stirring beneath his flesh. Sereth rose, his expression grave. The veil feeds upon imbalance, he said. It was never meant to remain in one vessel for long. You hold it too tightly, Kale. Soon it will hold you. Kale's lips curved faintly, the ghost of a smile. Perhaps that is what it was always meant to do. The Archmage took a step forward, desperation cutting through his composure. Do not speak like this. You think you can control it, but it is a storm without end. It will consume not just you, but everything you seek to protect. Kale turned his gaze toward the crumbling temple, its last fragments collapsing into dust. Then perhaps it will cleanse what must be destroyed. Eris stepped between them, her voice sharp. Enough. Whatever. Next we must decide it. Together. The world beyond these walls will not stay silent. Kingdoms will rise to fill the void the gods have left. Armies will march under banners of faith and fear alike. They will see you not as savior, Kyle, but as a blasphemy that must be erased. Then let them come, Kale said, his tone calm but deadly. They will learn what their gods could not. That power is not granted, it is taken. As he spoke, the ground beneath them trembled again, a low rumble that grew into a roar, and suddenly, from the fissures left by divine collapse, beams of golden light began to surge upward. Wild, uncontrolled, beautiful and terrible. The essence of the fallen gods was not dispersing, but merging, twisting into forms unseen, their divine energy seeking new vessels. Sereth's eyes widened in horror. It's happening, he said. Creation abhors emptiness. The divinities are reforming, not as gods, but as echoes, fragments of will seeking flesh. Kale stepped closer to the nearest column of light, the heat of it washing over him, filling the air with the scent of ozone and creation reborn. Let them come, he murmured. Let them rise again. This time, they will serve balance, not rule it. He extended his hand toward the light, and the moment his fingers touched it, the world convulsed. Visions poured into his mind. Entire civilizations burning, oceans swallowing continents, stars collapsing in silence, the universe rewriting itself, shifting its axis around the weight of what he had done. He saw faces too. Leora's among them. Her eyes filled not with blame, but sorrow, her voice echoing through the void. You cannot fight eternity. Kael. You can only become part of it. The light seared through him, and for a moment, he thought he might disintegrate into it. But then the veil surged, devouring the divine energy, twisting it, reshaping it into something new. The beam faded, and where Kael stood, the air shimmered with a strange duality. Light and darkness intertwined, like breath and heartbeat. His followers fell to their knees, some in reverence, others in terror, as his aura expanded, reaching beyond the temple ruins into the city. Beyond, awakening the dormant energy that slept beneath stone and bone. Sareth shielded his eyes, his voice breaking. Kael, what have you done? Kael looked down at his hands. They glowed faintly, veins pulsing, with alternating streams of crimson and gold. I have done what the gods feared most, he said quietly. I have become the balance. The Archmage's expression was one of despair. No mortal can carry that burden. You will tear the world apart. Kael's gaze softened, almost human again. Then I will hold it together, for as long as I can. He turned, walking down the temple steps, the mist parting before him as though the very air feared to touch him. Gather the survivors, he said to Eris. We'll rebuild not for conquest, but for understanding. The world will need guidance when it wakes to find its gods gone. Eris bowed, her head, her voice steady despite the tremor in her soul. And what will you be, Kael? A god among mortals. Kael paused, his eyes lifting to the bleeding sky. No, he said softly. A guardian. Until balance restores itself. I will bear the burden they abandoned. As he walked into the rising sun, the crimson light of the veil mingled with the gold of reborn divinity, painting his silhouette across the broken horizon, a figure both savior and destroyer, mortal and eternal, the embodiment of what the world had become, neither heaven nor hell, but something between. Behind him, Sareth watched, his heart heavy, whispering a prayer to gods that no longer existed. May balance forgive us all. Yet even as the prayer left his lips, he felt the tremor again, faint, but unmistakable. And, in the depths of the earth, something stirred, something ancient and patient, awakened by Kael's defiance. The battle was won, but the war for creation itself had only begun. The world, after the fall of the gods, was not silent. It breathed, it trembled, it wept. And, as the skies dimmed to a constant crimson hue, Kael walked through the ashes of creation like a man, caught between divinity and despair, his footsteps stirring the remnants of a universe that no longer knew its master. The veil within him pulsed, like a second heart, each beat a reminder that he had become something neither mortal nor eternal. Something that existed because the balance demanded it. Across the horizon, storms of golden fire roamed like wild beasts, consuming mountains, devouring seas, reshaping the land, as if creation itself sought to rewrite its story. Cities that had once worshipped the gods now knelt in terror before the chaos they had left behind. Some prayed to Kale as the new divine, while others cursed his name, calling him the Devourer, the Fiend Reborn. Yet Kale neither ruled nor rested. He wandered, guided not by ambition, but by necessity, seeking the fragments of divine power that still lingered, those shards of consciousness that refused to fade. Every fragment he froughtened to unmake him, for each one carried the will of a god, desperate to live again. Sereth had warned him, "You cannot hold infinity in mortal form. Even balance has limits." But Kale had long crossed the threshold of mortal comprehension. His dreams were no longer his own. They were visions of worlds collapsing, suns imploding, oceans boiling under the breath of reborn divinity. In those dreams, he saw Leora again, her voice calling from beyond the veil, her words wrapped in sorrow. "The path you walk leads not to peace, Kyle, but to an ending only you can endure." He awoke each time in the same way, with fire in his lungs and the weight of eternity pressing against his ribs. Still, he moved forward. He had to. The balance was failing. In the ruins of the once mighty citadel of Varanor, Kale found what remained of the Council of Dawn. The mortal sages who had once served as the voice of reason between gods and men. They were frail now, their minds half broken by the collapse of divine order. But their knowledge remained. "The world fractures," said the eldest among them, his voice thin as parchment. "The veil's power bleeds into the soil, the seas, the air. You have become its vessel. But a vessel can only hold so much before it shatters." Cato. Kale stood in the shadow of the council's broken hall, the wind whispering through shattered glass. "Then teach me how to contain it." The old man shook his head slowly. "Containment is not balance, Kyle. You cannot cage the storm. You must become its calm." Kyle's eyes glowed faintly, a crimson gold flicker that spoke of power beyond words. "And if calm no longer exists?" The sage's answer was a whisper. "Then the storm will decide for you." For weeks Kale remained among them, studying ancient scripts, searching through the ruins for an answer to the inevitable. The collapse of creation itself. Sereth rejoined him there, his once black robes, now gray with dust and sorrow. You cannot save them all, he told Kale one night, as they stood beneath a fractured sky, watching lightning ripple across constellations that no longer held their form. Every act of restoration feeds the veil's hunger. You heal one world, only to unmake another. The balance tips no matter which way you turn. Kale did not look at him. Then, the solution lies not in healing, but in acceptance. Sereth frowned. Acceptance of what? That the world as it was must die for the new to live. The Archmage stepped closer, his tone filled with quiet alarm. You sound like the gods before they fell. Kale turned, his gaze upon him. And for a heartbeat, Sereth saw not a man, but a cosmic being wrapped in human form. His presence both luminous and terrifying. Perhaps they were right about one thing. Kale said, creation requires destruction. But this time, I will decide what rises from the ashes. He left that night, traveling alone toward the northern reaches where the veil's energy was strongest. A place known only in legend as the Cradle of Echoes, said to be where the first god had drawn breath. The journey took him through wastelands of molten glass, across forests that bled light, through storms that screamed, with the voices of the dying divine. Each step drained him further. The veil within him, growing heavier, hungrier, as if it knew he approached its heart. When he finally reached the cradle, he found it not as legend described. Sanctuary of celestial beauty, but as a wound in the world, a spiraling abyss of light and darkness entwined, pulsing like the heart of existence itself. He stood at its edge, the air humming with power, so vast that even thought became pain. So this is where it began, he whispered, and the veil answered, and where it must end. The voice was not his, nor wholly separate. It was the fusion of every god he had slain, every echo of creation he had absorbed, speaking through him like a chorus of eternity. Kale fell to his knees, clutching his chest as visions consumed him. The birth of stars, the death of universes, the rise and fall of countless worlds, all woven into the single truth that the veil had always been alive, always waiting for a will strong enough to contain it. You chose me, he gasped. You made me your vessel. You made yourself. The veil replied. Every choice, every defiance, every act of balance led here. You are not the first to carry the veil, but you are the first to understand it. Kyle's breath came ragged, his body trembling under the weight of realization. Then tell me, how does it end? The veil's voice softened, almost kind. It ends when balance no longer requires a bearer. When the world can breathe without gods or guardians. When creation accepts its own imperfection. Kale looked into the abyss, its endless depth swirling with both beauty and terror. And what of me? You will fade, as all things must. But your echo will remain. The spark that teaches the next age to begin anew. For the first time in years, Kale felt something like peace. A quiet acceptance that his purpose was not to rule or to survive, but to ensure that life continued in whatever form it chose. Slowly, he rose to his feet, spreading his arms as the energy of the cradle surged around him. His body glowing, brighter with each heartbeat, until his form was little more than light and shadow entwined. Sereth arrived too late, his cries lost in the roar of the Veil's awakening as Kyle stepped into the abyss, his voice carrying on the wind. Balance is not found. It is made. The world shuddered. The light consumed everything. And for a brief, impossible moment, creation held its breath. Then silence, followed by the first dawn of a new age. One without gods. One where men would rise not through prayer, but through understanding. The legend of Kale, the Fiend Captive. The reborn guardian of balance, would live on not in temples or scripture, but in the quiet truth that even in ruin, rebirth was always possible. The world that emerged after Kyle's sacrifice was not one reborn in perfection, but one reborn in fragments, a mosaic of shattered realities, slowly knitting themselves together beneath a sky that still bore the faint scar of the Veil's awakening. And in the centuries that followed, his name became both myth and warning. A story whispered by scholars and sung by wanderers. A tale of the man who had slain the gods only to become the bridge between creation and oblivion. The land itself bore traces of his presence. Rivers that glowed faintly crimson under the moonlight. Forests that hummed with dormant magic, and mountains that molten tears when storms approached, as if remembering the fury of his final act. Humanity, stripped of divine rule, stumbled at first. Kingdoms rose and fell in the absence of celestial law, their rulers seeking to claim the mantle of gods long gone, only to learn that power without wisdom was a curse, heavier than any divine decree. The people of Atheris rebuilt their fallen city upon the ruins of the old, crafting temples not to gods, but to balance itself. Their priests, no longer conduits of prayer, but keepers of remembrance, guardians of the story of Kyle, the fiend captive who became the world's reluctant savior. They spoke of him not as a deity, but as a lesson that light and darkness were never enemies, merely halves of the same truth, and that the eternal war between creation and destruction existed only because neither could accept coexistence. Yet even as the world moved forward, something stirred beneath its fragile peace. The cradle of echoes, the abyss into which Kale had vanished, did not remain silent. Its pulse still beat faintly through the veins of the earth, a rhythm that no mortal could hear, but one that the old magic could feel. It was said that wandered too close to that place could see visions, flickers of crimson and gold, the shimmer of wings made of flame and shadow, and sometimes a voice whispering through the wind. Balance is not found, it is made. Among those who heard it was a young scholar named Alara, a descendant of the First Order, whose curiosity was matched only by her defiance. She had grown up studying the remnants of Kale's world, deciphering runes carved in the ruins of Atheris. And though the elders warned her that some knowledge was not meant for mortal hands, you come. She believed that understanding was the truest form of worship. When she stood before the sealed chasm of the cradle, she felt no fear, only recognition, as though the whisper that had haunted her dreams since childhood had finally led her home. The abyss greeted her with silence. Yet within that silence was the echo of life, faint but undeniable. She knelt, pressing her palm against the cold ground, and the air shimmered faintly, the same crimson, gold light that had once consumed Kale flickering beneath her touch. You left us, she murmured into the void. But you did not leave us empty. The wind answered, a low hum that seemed to breathe with the rhythm of her heartbeat. From the shadows of the cradle, a faint outline began to emerge, a form not of flesh, but of memory and energy, shaped by will and remembrance. It was not Kale, not truly, but an echo of his essence, the last fragment of the veil that had bound itself to creation. Alara stepped back, awe flooding through her, as the voice that had haunted her for years spoke again, not in command, but in invitation. The balance endures. The cycle turns. Will you keep it or break it? She trembled, her mind torn between reverence and terror. I am no guardian, she said. I am just a seeker. The light flared brighter, surrounding her in warmth that felt like both mercy and judgment. Then seek, and in seeking, you will guard. Balance is not a crown, Alara. It is a burden shared by those who remember. As the words faded, the ground beneath her hand pulsed once more. And in that moment, she saw visions. The world beyond her time, centuries into the future, where the descendants of mortals would wield the remnants of divine energy, shaping worlds, not through faith, but through understanding, where creation itself would evolve beyond its makers. She saw temples, built not to gods, but to the memory of choice, of courage, of those who dared to defy destiny's script. And through it all, she felt Kale's presence, not as a god watching from the heavens, but as a current within existence, the silent force that guided growth and decay alike. Tears filled her eyes as she whispered, "Then let it begin again." And so, it did. From that moment forward, the Cradle of Echoes became a sanctuary of rebirth, a place where knowledge and memory intertwined. The scholars of Atheris, led by Alara, formed a new order, the Keepers of the Veil, not bound by hierarchy or faith, but by a single vow, to maintain the balance between power and purpose. They studied the remnants of Kyle's magic, not to wield it, but to understand it. For they knew that the veil's strength lay not in domination, but in harmony. Generations passed, and with them came progress. The old world could never have imagined machines that harnessed energy from the remnants of divine essence. Cities that floated upon rivers of starlight, and people who learned to channel the balance within themselves rather than seeking it in the sky. Yet for all their advancement, humanity never forgot the lesson of the Fiend Captive, that power without compassion would always lead to ruin, and that even the brightest light casts a shadow. On the 1000th anniversary of the fall, the keepers gathered at the rebuilt Sanctum of Balance, where the air still shimmered, faintly, with the lingering memory of Kyle's final act. Alara's descendants stood at the altar, holding a fragment of the crimson crystal once formed from the veil's energy. They placed it at the temple's center, and as the first rays of dawn struck it, the crystal pulsed softly, alive once more. From it came a whisper, faint but unmistakable. The balance endures. The crowd bowed their heads, not in worship, but in remembrance. For they knew the truth. Kale had never sought godhood, never desired devotion. He had simply given the world the one gift no deity ever could, the freedom to choose its own path. As the sun rose higher, casting gold upon the scarlet sky, a quiet peace settled over Atheris. Children laughed, where once armies marched. The rivers, once black with divine blood, now sparkled clear again. The wound of the veil had become its blessing. And somewhere beyond the veil of sight, in a realm neither living nor dead, Kyle watched. Not as ruler, not as savior, but as witness to the balance he had died to preserve. A faint smile crossed his spectral face as he whispered to the wind. So long as they remember, the world will never fall. And with that, the light that had once burned crimson and gold faded into the horizon, merging with the dawn of eternity. A reminder that even in the shadow of destruction, the promise of rebirth always endures. Centuries after Kale's light had faded into legend, and the keepers of the veil had become architects of a world built upon equilibrium. A strange disturbance rippled across the heart of creation. A whisper that began in the deepest veins of the earth and rose upward, a long, forgotten melody, wakening after ages of silence. Reeds, reaching the dreams of those attuned to the old magic. And among them was Ceres, descendant of Alara, and a prodigy of the new generation of keepers, whose curiosity, hotter than wisdom could temper, whose heart longed to see the truth behind the myths her ancestors had guarded in reverence and fear. She had always felt a pull toward the cradle of echoes, the sacred chasm where Kyle's essence had dissolved into the world, and though the elders forbade her to venture near it, warning that the balance of the veil must never again be touched, her spirit was not one that had to boundaries drawn by those who feared discovery. On the eve of the third millennium since the fall, when the twin moons aligned above Atheris in the sky blazed with a storm of red and gold light, Ceres slipped away from the sanctuary, her footsteps silent, her purpose a storm of questions no teaching could silence. The world she crossed was one of marvels her ancestors could never have imagined. Towering citadels, woven of crystal and flame, rivers that sang with energy drawn from the veil's dormant pulse, cities that floated like fragments of dreams above the clouds, their people thriving in harmony with forces once thought divine. But even in this utopia, Ceres had felt the subtle tremor of something breaking. The rivers dimming for moments, the skies flickering with unnatural shadows, as if the heartbeat of the world itself had begun to falter. She believed that somewhere within the cradle lay the key, not to power, but to understanding what the keepers had forgotten. That balance was not meant to be preserved through fear, but through renewal. As she descended into the valley where the veil had once torn through existence, she found the earth still humming with faint, rhythmic energy, a sound like breath caught between worlds. The air shimmered, heavy with fragments of memory, echoes of Kyle's final battle, the screams of gods, the thunder of a dying sky. Ceres knelt at the edge of the chasm, And as her fingertips grazed the obsidian soil, a surge of warmth coursed through her. Visions, flooding her mind in flashes of light and shadow. She saw Kyle's final moments, the agony of his sacrifice, the beauty of his defiance. And she felt something stir deep within her, as though the memory itself recognized her blood. The wind rose, carrying a faint whisper that made her heart race. The balance is shifting. She tried to speak, but the voice was already fading, replaced by the sound of something vast awakening below. From the depths of the cradle, a glow began to rise. Not the crimson, gold radiance of the veil's creation, but a darker hue, deep violet and black, alive and yet unholy. It pulsed with rhythm, slow and deliberate, like a heartbeat long buried, but now returning with purpose. Sarah staggered back, her eyes wide. No, the veil was sealed. It can't. But the truth was undeniable. The equilibrium Kael had forged was unraveling, not from outside forces, but from within the very essence of creation. The magic of the world, long held in balance, had grown restless, seeking motion once more. It was not destruction it craved, but evolution, a new shape for the eternal dance. As the light swelled, a figure began to take form within it, tall and indistinct, born of the same ethereal glow that once marked the fiend captive himself. Yet, this was not Kael. This presence felt colder, a reflection, rather than a continuation, like the echo of a memory corrupted by time. It spoke not in words, but in sensation, a flood of emotion that pressed against Sarah's mind. Anger, longing, hunger. The energy around her rippled, and she realized in terror that it was feeding on her, drawing strength from her curiosity, her defiance, her need to understand. The cradle had not remained empty. It had been gestating something, born, all that Kael had left behind. The fragments of divine essence, the remnants of mortal fear, and the imbalance that came from trying too hard to preserve perfection. "You are not him," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You are what was left behind." The light surged in response, and from it came a whisper, one that chilled her to her soul. "I am what balance forgot." The words echoed through the valley, shaking the air. And in that moment, Saris understood what ancestors had feared all along. The veil's cycle of creation and destruction had never truly ended. It had only paused, waiting for the right spark to reignite it. And she, in her quest for truth, had become that spark. The shadowed figure began to rise, taking on a more defined shape, its eyes burning like dying stars. Around it, the earth cracked, veins of dark energy spreading outward, poisoning the once holy ground. Ceres tried to pull away, but her body refused to obey, caught between terror and awe. The energy of the cradle wrapped around her like tendrils of smoke, lifting her from the ground, whispering promises of understanding, of transcendence, of becoming one with the forgotten half of balance. The chaos that Kale had bound, but never destroyed. Her mind screamed as visions poured into her. The gods reborn in monstrous forms, cities collapsing under skies of black flame, mortals turning against the keepers in fear and confusion. She saw the world's future as it would be if the imbalance continued, a cycle repeating with no end, every rebirth more violent than the last. With a final surge of will, she tore her consciousness free, collapsing on the edge of the abyss, gasping for air. The glow receded, though not completely. The entity remained within the cradle, silent, waiting as if assessing her worth. "You wanted truth," it whispered softly, its voice now eerily familiar. Half Kyle, half something else. "Now you must decide if truth deserves to live." Ceres stared into the chasm, tears streaking her dirt-stained face, her mind spinning with realization. The balance Kale had created was not meant to be eternal. It was meant to evolve, and she, like him, stood at the precipice of that choice. To preserve what was fading, or to allow it to change. Risking everything, the wind howled through the valley, carrying the scent of storm and fire. And Ceres rose slowly, her resolve hardening. "Then I will find the answer," she whispered. "Even if it breaks me." The shadow smiled within the light, fading into the depths as the chasm sealed itself once more, leaving behind only silence. But that silence was not peace. It was a breath before awakening, a pause before the next act of creation began. As Ceres turned toward the horizon, the first rays of dawn broke across the sky, painting it crimson and violet, the colors of both Kale and the thing born of his remnants. The world would soon learn that balance was not a stillness to be guarded, but a storm to be navigated, and that the age of gods and mortals alike was not over. It was only changing its form once again. The dawn that followed Ceres's awakening, recorder in recordery, was not more. The sky blood violet and gold, streaked with a darkness that shimmered like oil upon water, as though creation itself was uncertain whether to rejoice or mourn. And across the lands of Atheris, the world began to tremble with an energy that felt both ancient and new, both divine and profane. The keepers of the veil felt it first, those who had long tended to the equilibrium Kale had forged, waking from their meditations, with hearts burning, with visions, consuming flames, consuming the horizon. The temples shuddered. The runes that once glowed faintly with harmony, now flickering, uneven rhythm, as if the heartbeat of the world had grown irregular. In their panic, the High Keeper summoned the remaining council, their voices rising in disbelief as they deciphered the patterns written in the sky, a prophecy long forgotten, one that spoke of the reversal, the time when the balance would tilt not because of destruction, but because of rebirth misunderstood. And somewhere deep beneath their feet, Ceres walked the silent paths of the Undercity, her steps echoing against the stone carved with Kyle's sigils, the ancient story now more alive within her veins than in any book or sermon. Since her encounter with the shadow in the cradle, she had not slept, for when her eyes closed, she saw the face of Kyle, not as savior, but as something deeper, a reflection of both mercy and fury, and she heard the whisper of the other voice, the one that called itself what balance forgot. It haunted her, not as evil, but as inevitability. She began to understand that what the keepers had preserved for millennia was not balance, but stagnation. That the act of freezing creation in perfect harmony had slowly suffocated its essence, for balance, like life, was movement. Motion between opposites, not stillness. As she emerged from the tunnels and stepped into the great atrium of Atheris, she found the city transformed. The floating spires pulsed with unstable light. The crystal veins that powered them, now flickering in waves that resonated with the same rhythm she had felt beneath the earth. People gathered in the streets, eyes turned skyward, murmuring prayers to gods long dead, and though none of them could name it, they all felt it. The shifting of the world's soul. Ceres raised her hand, and the crimson mark that had appeared on her palm since the night of the cradle glowed faintly, pulsing in time with the trembling ground. The mark was not a curse. It was a link, a bond to the forgotten side of creation, and she could feel its pull growing, stronger each hour. It's not returning to destroy us, she whispered to herself. It's trying to complete itself. But the keepers did not see it that way. The council branded her a heretic, accusing her of awakening the dormant veil, the remnant shadow of Kale's essence that had long been buried. They feared her mark, feared her words, feared the power that flickered behind her eyes when she spoke of evolution. When they came for her, She did not fight. She simply looked upon them with sorrow, for she saw in them the same fear that had once ruled the gods Kael, had destroyed. The keepers imprisoned her in the sanctum, below the hall of balance, chaining her not with iron, but with sigils of silence, binding her voice, her magic, her connection to the veil. Yet even there, beneath stone and sacred wards, the whispers did not cease. You sought truth. The voice murmured through her dreams. Now the truth seeks you. The darkness, in the corners of her cell, began to shift, forming tendrils of violet light. And as the sigils pulsed in resistance, cracks began to form in their perfect symmetry. Above, storms gathered. Storms that shimmered with lightning, not of the heavens, but of the veil itself, splitting across the sky like veins of living energy. The people of Atheris watched in terror as their floating cities wavered, the great crystals groaning under the strain of imbalance. The High Keeper stood before the temple altar, pleading to Kyle's memory for deliverance. But Kale was no god to answer prayers. His gift had always been choice. And the world now faced the consequence of that freedom. Deep within her prison, Saris realized that the world's decay was not punishment. It was rebirthed, struggling against the chains of its own preservation. If balance is motion, she thought, then stagnation is death. With that thought, the sigils binding her shattered, light erupting from her body in a cascade of crimson and violet fire. The explosion tore through the sanctum, sending shockwaves through the temple above. The keepers fell to their knees as the light flooded every corridor, and when it cleared, Saris stood at the center, unbound, her eyes glowing with the twin hues of the veil, the colors of Kael and his forgotten counterpart, light and shadow fused as one. The voice within her spoke, no longer as separate from her, but through her. You are the vessel of completion. The cycle must turn again. She rose into the air, as the ground, beneath her feet, cracked open, revealing veins of light that spread across the city like roots of living energy, connecting every crystal, every conduit, every forgotten altar. The ancient wards that once sealed the veil trembled, and through them a pulse echoed, a rhythm both divine and mortal. The people screamed, but among the terror, some felt awe, for they recognized the pattern in the chaos. The same pulse that had once restored the world after Kyle's sacrifice. The keepers tried to intervene, chanting the old incantations of binding, but their words faltered as the air thickened, shimmering with power beyond their control. Saris opened her eyes, and for a moment, The sky itself responded, splitting in two as a pillar of light erupted from the cradle of echoes, far beyond the city, connecting heaven and earth in a bridge of raw creation. Through it, the forgotten voice spoke again, not as shadow, not as corruption, but as truth unveiled. Balance was never meant to end. It changes, or it dies. The city trembled. The people wept, and Ceres extended her hand toward the heavens. In that instant, she understood Kyle. Not as legend, not as savior, but as the first who dared to let the world breathe. The pulse of the veil grew louder, and she became its echo, her body dissolving into threads of light that spread across the land. Every fragment of her essence touched something. Stone, tree, river, mind. And where it touched, harmony was restored, but not the static balance of old. It was alive, shifting, imperfect, yet beautiful. The darkness and the light danced once more, not as enemies but as partners. The keepers watched in awe as their world transformed before their eyes, realizing too late that what they had feared was salvation itself. When the storm finally subsided, Ceres was gone, her form scattered into the veins of existence. But her voice lingered in the wind, a whisper, carried across mountains and seas. Creation does not end. It begins again. And so, from the ashes of fear and the ruins of stagnation, the new balance was born. Not in temples, not in law, but in the hearts of those who dared to change, those who understood that even perfection must die to be reborn. The age of the keepers ended that day, and the age of the seekers began. Children of both Kale and Ceres, inheritors of the eternal storm that defined all life, all love, all creation. The dawn that followed the storm of rebirth was not calm, but alive, trembling with a pulse that resonated through every fragment of creation. A rhythm that was neither Kale's nor Ceres's alone, but the song of all that had ever lived, died, and been remade. And as the light spread across Atheris, painting the shattered spires in hues of gold and violet, the world itself seemed to breathe for the first time in millennia. Not under the rule of gods, nor bound by the laws of men, but in harmony with itself, fluid, unpredictable, infinite. The people awoke to find the city changed, beyond recognition. Rivers flowed backward, before merging into spirals of crystal light. The sky rippled with translucent veils that shimmered between day and night, and the great citadels of the keepers had become living monuments, their stone walls growing vines of luminescent energy that pulsed softly like veins of a slumbering giant. There was no panic this time, no fear of the unknown. only wonder, cautious and reverent, as if humanity had remembered something it had long forgotten, that the universe itself was alive and ever changing. The old keepers, stripped of their authority, yet unburdened of their arrogance, gathered beneath the ruins of the Sanctum of Balance, where the last flickering embers of Sirius's light still danced upon the air. And in that silence, they heard her final whisper echo through the winds. Balance is not perfection. It is the courage to move forward. From that moment, the order dissolved itself, and from its ashes rose the seekers, a new generation of wanderers, philosophers, and storytellers who carry the wisdom of both the veil and the cradle, walking among the people not as priests, but as guides, those who reminded the world to question, to adapt, to change. They rebuilt Atheris not as a city of stone, but as a living organism, its streets grown from crystallized roots, its towers rising like flowers that responded to the rhythm of those who dwelled within. The veil, once sealed and feared, now pulsed freely through the earth, its energy gentle, but omnipresent, nurturing rather than controlling, and humanity learned to live not in defiance of magic, but in dialogue with it. Yet, even amidst this harmony, echoes of the past lingered. In the depths of the cradle of echoes, where Kale had once vanished, and where Ceres had faced the forgotten side of balance, the remnants of both beings still resonated. Two halves of a single truth. The darkness that had once sought to consume now lay quiet, no longer starved, but fulfilled, while the light that had once sought to command now shimmered with humility. It was said that on nights when both moons rose, as one, travelers could hear them speaking to each other through the wind, their voices inseparable, like two currents merging into a single tide. The cycle turns, the world endures, generations passed, and the story of the Fiend Captive became myth once more, retold in countless forms across time. In one version, Kale was a god who sacrificed his divinity to save mankind. In another, he was a mortal who defied the heavens for love. Some said Ceres was his reincarnation. Others said she was the daughter of the veil itself. But in every retelling, one truth remained constant: that creation's greatest act was not in its beginning, but in its ability to begin again. The seekers preserve this truth, not through sacred text, but through art, through song, through memory. They painted the story of Kale and Ceres upon the walls of living temples that bloomed with light, carved their symbols into the roots of trees, that whispered the tale to the wind, and sang their names during the solstice when the sky turned crimson and gold, the colors of the eternal balance. As centuries melted into aeons, humanity evolved alongside the veil, no longer limited by flesh and fear. They learned to weave thought into matter, to traverse dreams as easily as roads, to speak with the rivers and listen to the stars. They did not conquer the world. They became part of it. The term divine lost its meaning, for divinity had returned to its rightful place within every living thing. And yet, even in this new golden age, one question remained unspoken. What lay beyond the veil, beyond the endless rebirths, beyond even balance itself? It was a question few dared to ask, until one night, a child was born beneath a sky that shimmered with both fire and shadow. Her eyes glowed faintly with the colors of the veil, and when she laughed, the air around her rippled as though the world itself responded. The Seekers named her Lyra, meaning the note between worlds. For her presence seemed to bridge not just light and dark, but something deeper, something beyond the duality that had shaped existence for so long. As she grew, the signs followed her. Plants bloomed in her footsteps. The sick recovered at her touch, and those who dreamed near her saw visions of a horizon that had no end, a realm untouched by birth or death. The elders of Atheris watched in awe and fear, realizing that perhaps the story had not ended, that the veil itself had chosen once again to evolve. When Lyra turned 16, she stood upon the cliffs, overlooking the cradle of echoes, the place where Kale had vanished, and Cirrus had been reborn. And she felt the pulse of the world rising from below. A heartbeat she had known her entire life. The wind whispered her name, not in one voice but in two. Kyle's steady and strong, Cirrus's gentle and resolute, intertwined in harmony. You are both, the wind said, and you are neither. The cycle must now go beyond itself. Tears filled her eyes, not of sorrow, but of knowing, and she stepped forward, her bare feet glowing as the earth parted before her, revealing the old chasm reborn as a pool of liquid light. Without fear, she entered it, and as she sank into the brilliance, the sky above erupted into a symphony of color, a final convergence of all that had ever been. Across the world, every living being paused, feeling a warmth in their chest, as if the heartbeat of the world had become their own. When the light faded, the cradle was gone, transformed into a field of starlit flowers that sang softly in the night wind. The people did not mourn, for they understood. The veil had completed its journey, transcending the duality of creation and destruction, of beginning and end. Lyra had not died. She had become the silence between heartbeats, the stillness between storms, the promise that every ending carries within it. And so, the world moved forward. Not perfect, not eternal, but alive, always changing, always remembering. The Seekers continued to wander, telling the story of Kyle, Ceres, and Lyra, not as gods or heroes, but as reflections of what it meant to live. To rise, to fall, to begin again. The legend came to be known by a single name, whispered across generations, a name that carried both awe and peace. The Rebirth of the Fiend Captive. And in every whispered retelling, one truth endured beyond all time and form. That balance was never a destination, but the eternal motion of existence itself. The quiet, ceaseless heartbeat of creation.